I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with Abyss Battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, real quick before we get started on the show, I'm just going to talk about Treeline Academy. You've heard me say it. I can't even tell you how many times. Mark Livesay is treelineacademy.net. That's treelineacademy.net. Sign up. Use the promo code PC2020. Save yourself $20. Can't say it enough. It's awesome, amazing, most comprehensive e-scouting course out there. Check it out for yourself. Sign up. Use promo code PC2020. And now let's get to the show. All right, so I'm sitting here and I am talking to Carla Brauer, and she's got a pretty interesting story that I heard on another podcast, and I just really had to talk to her, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So Carla, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Carla Brauer, and I am a pretty new hunter and angler. I've only been, hunting for about 4 years. I harvested my first animal 3 years ago. And I guess one of the reasons that seems surprising, aside from me being a woman and being in my 30s, is that what feels like a lifetime ago, I used to be a really strong supporter of animal rights and a hardcore, super dedicated vegan. So it's definitely been a big mindset shift to get to where I am today.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I kind of want to break that down and go into it a little further, if you don't mind. I mean, were your parents animal rights activists as well? Or, I know you grew up in California and, right? Is that where it was?
Yeah, so I grew up, born and raised in San Francisco, so that will set some of the context for people. It was definitely a lot better of a place, or more conducive to the vegan lifestyle, I should say, than elsewhere in the country, especially back then. But no, my I was raised by my single mom, and she was nothing anywhere near vegan or animal rights activist. We didn't even have pets really when I was growing up. So we ate pretty much the standard American, late 80s, early 90s diet. I remember we used to have veal cutlets like all the time when I was growing up. It was like the luxury, Friday night meal. My mom would get these little like pasty white veal nuggets from Safeway, and we would like eat them. And I was like, these are just the best meat.
So
In retrospect, it probably tasted like nothing.
But so how did that, how did that change? At what point were you like, oh my God, I'm never going to eat meat again? That's kind of a shift where, I know people do it, but I not coming from that background or that reasoning, I really don't really understand all that.
Yeah, for sure. And it started a little bit slowly. I didn't kind of dive head first into veganism. But I remember one time my mom and I were in downtown San Francisco around like the holidays, and there, was a bunch of shopping going on and holiday displays. And one of the things that they would do every year with animal rights groups in the area is they would do like a fur free Friday. And they would, I think it was the same day as the big shop. What's that big shopping day that comes like right around Thanksgiving? I'm not
Like
a
the
big shopper
Black Friday,
now.
is that the,
Yeah, thank you. That's Black Friday. So on Black Friday, when like everything is swarmed with people, they would set up these anti-fur displays, and this is like downtown San Francisco with like Neiman Marcus and Saks and all the places that
Right.
sold like luxury fur items. So it was just basically like a way to try to guilt people into not supporting the places that sold fur. And I'd never seen anything like that. And it was like the first thing that triggered my brain to be like, oh, animal products come from an animal. And, how it gets from one thing to another, how it gets from the animal to me is such a big mystery. And I was probably like 13, I think, at this point. And I was like devastated by the signs that they were holding. And I think they were showing some videos or something, just devastated, like seeing these like foxes and bobcats and stuff that reminds you of your pets. Not that we had any, but theoretical
Right.
pets that I
Right.
wanted. And it just kind of like started getting me thinking about, well, this is terrible, and I have these really strong opinions and feelings about this. Like, what do I do? And I remember I wrote to one of the animal rights organizations. I think this was back in the day when you actually had to get like a pen and paper and like send it, and told them how I thought it was great and I was never going to buy fur. And like they actually sent me a thing back, and this was the beginning of an interaction that led to me not only working for that organization but being their National Fur Free Friday campaign coordinator some years later. So
So
I kind of took it pretty seriously.
so I mean, after that happened, then your next step was like, I mean, did you see some videos or something on just how nasty it was on some big commercial operation, or what was the like the pivotal role where okay, the fur, that's bad. Don't want to see these animals raised just to be slaughtered for their fur, and then it goes into the whole food thing, or how did that start for you then?
Yeah, so it kind of begs the question, if I don't like the way this animal product is produced, well, there's this other way that I'm consuming animal products every single day. So I started, and as I became more involved in like the animal, vegetarian animal rights scene there, you just get exposed to things. And I saw, videos of really awful treatment of animals on factory farms and, intensive confinement and, trucking and slaughter videos. And I was like, well, gosh, I don't want to participate in this, 3 meals a day. So I went vegetarian pretty early on. I think I was probably 15 or something. Um, and I started volunteering more with the animal rights organization that I would end up working at. And I remember really vividly, like feeling like I was just so like such a enlightened person by being vegetarian. And I remember going to volunteer for my first day at this animal rights organization, and I brought in a plate of cookies. And the first thing they asked me was like, "Are there eggs in them?" And I was like, "Yeah." But I was like, I just didn't occur to me. I thought that they were going to be so impressed that I was vegetarian, and they were like, "No, we're not touching those. Take them away." And that's how I met vegans for the first time. And after I got over being like completely mortified that I insulted them by bringing these cookies in, um, I, started learning more about dairy production and all that kind of stuff. And I, went headlong into embracing like full vegan diet and lifestyle.
So then how long did the whole vegan lifestyle last before, because I know how it went, but I'd like the other people to know it too, how the whole story kind of transpires into, well, maybe I can do this or I could do that. But before we get to that, how long did that go on? I mean, was
I
it,
just now, like, God, how old am I?
I mean, did it go on
uh,
into your 20s or was it, I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
I was pretty seriously vegan and doing animal rights related things all the way through the end of my teenage years and then into my early 20s. Sorry, there's thunder going on outside. Don't mind
It's
that.
okay.
Uh, and into my early 20s. And it really wasn't until I went to college that I started thinking a little bit more about being a little bit more open-minded about it. And I went to college a little bit late. I didn't go straight from high school. I did some work and I did some community college between the two things. Um, but when I went to college, I was studying journalism, and one of the things that I was doing news broadcasting as well as like music shows and stuff for the sorry, lightning or thunder is very distracting. Um, so I was doing journalism, and one of the things that I like to do is, of course, there's not really such a thing as an unbiased journalism. I would like to try to get stories in that fit, what I want to talk about, of course. So anytime there was an animal rights related issue or something that I could kind of use as a way to talk about animal issues or vegetarianism or veganism, I would completely take advantage of it. And one of the stories that came up was there was this woman who lived in the area, and she had worked with a pretty national big deal animal rights organization to confiscate and rescue all of these egg laying chickens from this intensive confinement factory farm. And I can't remember how many she took. It's got to be at least 50. Like there were a lot of chickens. She was a really sweet woman. And so I interviewed her for a story, and it turned out, that she was having a really hard time because the group that helped her obtain these chickens was kind of like, there you go, bye. And she was left with all these birds who were, kind of sick, never seen the light of day. They were all just like in shell shock and, it's just medical bills, feed bills that she didn't quite think through, I think. Um, and so one of the ways that she was trying to cope with this is she would go to the farmers markets and sell their eggs. And she had a big sign above her booth that said vegan eggs. And of course that would get a lot of people, going up and being
Right.
like, what are you talking about? And I was of course also like, okay, I'm vegan and that's an egg and those things don't go together. But over time, having met her and talked to her and understanding where these birds were coming from and seeing her every week, awkwardly waving to her at the farmer's market as I went by with my little like basket of veggies, I had to kind of ask myself, like, why do I think that her eggs aren't vegan appropriate? Like obviously, like by the semantics, they're not vegan, but like what is it about them that would be unethical to me? And push comes to shove, there really wasn't anything. The birds were living their best life. They were getting medical care. She was a really sweet woman who had the best of intentions and took them out of a bad situation. And these birds are, I assume people probably figure this out, but they lay eggs whether you want them to or not. And if you
Absolutely.
can either lock them or let, the ravens and whatever get them and they can just sit there and rot. So it's not like she was exploiting these birds. They were just doing what they were doing. And ultimately, I was like, I'm just going to buy, like, it's like a $5 donation to like the bird cause. I'll just take some eggs home. And, what's the worst that could happen? And I think it took me a long time before I actually like cooked that egg and consumed it. And I vaguely remember realizing that like I was in my 20s. I didn't know how to cook an egg. I didn't know how to cook much of anything at that point. But I did, and it was fine. And I started to realize that eggs are actually pretty good. And if I have this source of eggs that is not just cruelty free, but it's like actively helping birds who were abused live a better life. Yeah, it's a pretty as far as I was concerned, that was ethically a great choice for me.
So,
So I ended up doing that pretty often.
so the question, it kind of comes to my mind is, are like vegetarians or some people worried about an egg that they're going to like kill a chicken or something like that when they consume an egg? Because I mean, no matter what happens, like you said, a chicken's going to lay an egg and it's not actually fertilized. So like you said, it would just go to rot. So I'm just kind of curious from like a vegan's mindset or a vegetarian mindset, Would that be kind of an issue as well, or no?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you start to step away and look a little bit critically at, veganism, or it doesn't have to be veganism. It could be any, hard rule defined lifestyle that they don't leave a lot of room for gray areas. And it became this issue that was like, it's not about the ethics of the egg, it's the fact that it is from an animal.
Oh,
It doesn't meet the criteria of being vegan because it came from an animal, regardless of whether or not you're personally comfortable with it. And, life is made of gray areas and nuances. And if you try to put yourself in this bubble where like this is good and everything else is bad, it's nothing but trouble for you. Like, yeah, that is
absolutely.
not going to help the world be a better place. So, that was one of the things that I started to realize as I was opening my mind to being a little bit more just being like, well, I ate an egg, therefore I'm going out and buying, a steak and some bacon tomorrow. But as I was starting to explore what my ethical options were that made me feel comfortable, but weren't technically vegan, it really made me realize that, well, you can't define ethics with one word or one category. There could be things that are not vegan or that are vegan that are very not ethical and not sustainably or ethically produced. And there could be things that are made of meat that are both sustainable and ethical. So, you got to leave room for a little bit of the gray areas.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, just like even just modern agriculture within itself, there's so much, killing that goes on and spraying and damage to, insect populations and pollinators and different things that people don't even take into consideration with those practices, but it's okay to eat the vegetable that comes from that, or there's so much, like you said, just gray area. And then what other thing that comes to my mind, I just recently watched a video and it was actually they were cloning meat and growing it in a laboratory. And to me, I was just like, that is more than unnatural to me. I can't get past that fact. I'm like, that's not a normal life cycle. And, in my mind, I see it as that animal served its purpose, right? To eat and consume. And then it probably would have died a brutal, horrible death anyway, or died of old age and starved to death anyway if I didn't harvest it. So, I mean, that's how I justified it. And then we'll probably get into that with you as well, I'm sure. How did that go for you then?
Well, you're right that the more you look at agriculture, especially things that result even in vegan products, you start to realize that the systems are all very connected, and it's really hard to produce plants and vegetables and fruits without using some kind of animal product or having some kind of ecological impact or some kind of collateral damage to animals. And so technically, when you really, really get down to it, like I don't really think there is anything that's vegan. My my wife used to work for she used to do like pest census. I don't really know how to call it for fruit production places out here in the Willamette Valley. And she got to see them harvesting. I can't remember what kind of berries they were, blackberries or raspberries or something. And they have these big machines that go over the field, or, over the trellises and collect the berries. And they kind of like shake the fruit out of them or something. I wasn't there. I'm not very good at describing this, but the moral of the story is that at the end they actually had these people going through where the berries were landing and picking out dead birds and rats and chicks and eggs and all the stuff that was in these plants while they were harvesting the berries. Now, I don't have a strong ethical opposition to eating fruit, but it's one of those things that you realize, you really start to look at how we raise or how we produce our food. It's never as simple as we think it is. It's never, that idyllic, perfect situation of these people, like quietly, hand picking berries. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think, we live in kind of this blissful ignorance when we can go to the grocery store and get, lettuce and ripe strawberries in the middle of winter. And we
Right.
never stopped to think what happened to get them to us. And uh, so, yeah, it's for me, my ethics evolved to not be about the items I was eating. It was about figuring out how those items were produced, how they came to me, what their overall impact is, was more important to me than, did it come from an animal, yes or no?
Right. So you you started eating the eggs, and then you went to work at a couple farms, right?
Yeah, and like I said, eating eggs was kind of the thing that made me open my mind to other sustainable options. And there was a farm that wasn't local to where I was living, but they were selling where I was living. And I remember going to the butcher counter, where they sold, and kind of grilling them on all of, the details of how, I think we were talking about pigs and cattle and how they were produced, and, what the sustainability of it was, and how the animals feel about things. And ultimately, I realized that there were some pretty amazingly responsible and caring farmers who were in the Bay Area who had, products like actual meat to sell. And I realized that I would never really feel 100% comfortable with it unless I actually start to see it firsthand. Because, I mean, marketing is marketing, and you can say whatever you want about something being produced however you want to say it. There's very little regulation when it comes to, is this quote natural and free range? Doesn't always mean
Right.
what people think it means. So I was like, I want to actually go out. I want to meet farmers. I want to see, what is actually happening. I want to witness maybe somebody slaughtering something. And I ended up subletting the apartment I was living in and quitting my job. And I spent about 4 months traveling around the Southwest in California, visiting different farms, seeing different practices, and I got a really good introduction to raising livestock that way.
So I just if I find it interesting, like why did you choose to do that? Why you were curious at that point and just wanted to know, you wanted to see the details and see if maybe there was other humane ways of practices to do that, or I mean, or were you just wanting to do like a journalistic research type approach to it?
It would be nice if I had any kind of, like financial or like journalistic, whatever motivation. But it was really, I just have an intense curiosity, and that's kind of my personality. When I'm curious about something, I like to get really deep into it. And I also like to see things firsthand. Like before I left, I had read a couple of books about sustainable agriculture and livestock farming in particular. So I was pretty convinced, like, yeah, this is definitely something that I could get behind. But just like when I first found out, the treatment of animals, and went down the rabbit hole of like figuring out everything about it and becoming vegan and becoming really hardcore about that, it kind of was the same on the way out. I was like, okay, well, if there's sustainably produced livestock, I want to see how it's done. I want to know how, who these people are who are doing it. I want to like see it happen. And it was really kind of to appease my own curiosity. Don't
Yeah.
strongly recommend people quit their corporate jobs and do things like this. It was for sure.
So what comes to my mind is I can't remember the guy's last name, but Will something down in Georgia, and he I don't know if have you heard of him? So I think it's like something Oak Farms, Fair Oak Farms, or something. Um,
Oh no.
and what he did was he raised cattle and had a few other farm operations that he did, and he's like, man, I just don't like these practices, and the soil is just 2 seasons away from being fully depleted every year, all these different things without putting all these chemicals on the soil and all these different things, and how is that affecting my animals? And he started thinking about it, and he came across a book that was on the Serengeti, and it related to the Serengeti farming method that you could apply here to to our modern agriculture. And so he got really, really intrigued by it, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to try it. So he raises like 30 different animals on his farm, and each one of them has an intricate role for the next one. So he's got goats that go in and they eat all the bramble and all the different whatever, and the sheep come in and they graze behind the cattle or in front of the cattle, and they get it to whatever height the cattle eats. And then there's chickens and ducks and geese, and they all free range, and everything just works, and it created this beautiful, wonderful, just symbiotic relationship with everything, and everything just is balanced and it works perfectly. And I watched that story and it was just so neat to see that. I was like, man, that's the way to do it.
Oh wow,
It's pretty cool. You'll have to check them out.
Yeah.
There's like a 40-minute video on YouTube, and I was just fascinated by it. So now, like, the guy drives out in his Jeep into the pasture every evening and watches the sunset with a bottle of wine and all his cattle grazing around him.
Well, that doesn't sound like a bad way to live.
No, not at all. I think, and he's actually got, like, I don't know if he still does or how it works, but I remember there was another video I watched, and he was talking about how the eagle population in the area had, it just sort of, there was a huge resurgence because now there's all these chickens and ducks and geese and everything free ranging all over the place, that it started out where there was like 1 or 2 eagles in the area, and it soon became like 5 or 6. And over these generations, as his farm got bigger, I think now he said there's like 32 in the area or something like that. I mean, it's just a crazy amount. And so now he actually has like the one and only predation permit for eagles for like a non-lethal tactic to get rid of them. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enough chickens around, you'll see your eagle and owl population
Absolutely.
skyrocket.
That's my chickens. I've lost a few chickens to an eagle as well.
Yeah, we love our raptors around here. We live right down the street from a wildlife refuge, and so we have a lot of them. And there's a reason we no longer keep chickens here.
Oh,
We lost
no.
our last one to an owl, and that was it. I was like, okay, they don't have the survival instincts needed for this kind of place. So right now we just have ducks and geese, and they never have a problem.
Yeah, the geese are mean enough. I think they can kind of take care of themselves. But yeah, I actually had to put a run on my coop because I just got tired of losing them. So we still let them free range, but only if we're out and around. And then we'll just kind of, if we're going back in or something, we'll throw some feed in there to get them all to run in and close it up on them. It's not as good as it should be, but it's better than the alternative, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
So kind of got sidetracked there, but I had to say it because it's really cool, and I want you to know about it too. It's an amazing process that this guy went and undertook, and it's pretty cool. But I think that's kind of what you were kind of looking into, just probably on a smaller scale. And I wish we could do that even more, just across the board. But so you went and you did this, and you had these relationships with all these people, right? And then at what point did you get like actually involved with the processing of the animals, or the actual harvesting, we'll call it, taking of the animal and then turning it into something and eating it?
Well, it was sooner than I really anticipated. So the first farm ranch that I went to visit was in New Mexico, and they happened to have a young steer who was kind of up for butchering. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and the whole time I was like wringing my hands over the fact that this might happen while I was there, and like, oh God, what am I going to do? Like, am I going to be comfortable watching this? You never know how you're going to react to something until you see it. And sometimes, sometimes I feel like the more you worry about something and the more you feel like you're scared of it, the more you're like secretly like fascinated and you're just trying to cover it really, because at that point, like I like looked up, they had a pretty decent library of farm books there. I looked up like everything I could read about on farm butchery and slaughter. And like at one point, the end of my experience there was coming up. I already had plans at a different farm to shift over to a different place. And that steer was still walking around. And I was like, okay, guys, are we doing this or not? Like, come on, like I've been working myself up about it for weeks. Like, are we doing it? And we like the day before I left, we did the slaughter and initial butcher to get it ready to hang. And so my first ever experience with an animal dying in front of me was this giant steer. And, the farmers were great, but like this was like their personal, they weren't market farming cattle. This was like a one-off, son of their dairy cow. And they had never slaughtered anything bigger than a goat before. So
Oh,
this was like, I was not the only one who had no idea what was going on. The actual slaughter went beautifully. They had a rifle, and that steer died with a big, blob of hay in his mouth and never knew what was going on. And it was very, as good as you could hope to have it happen the first time you watch it. And everything after that was just chaos. Just like, all right, what do we do now? Well, we've got to get it hung up. We've got to skin it. Skinning a cow that is hanging from, the rafters or whatever. And like the amount of stuff that comes out of that animal just blows your freaking mind. Like, I mean, you know how it is when you're skinning the abdominal cavity of a deer, and like you start to get all the innards coming out. It's like that times 10, and you're like, I didn't even know this was like physically possible to be
right.
inside of that cow package. But it was an interesting experience. Definitely learned a lot. I left the next day, so I literally never got to taste any part of the cow. Just got to kind of see it happen and took off. But since then, I have slaughtered many sheep and goats and chickens and turkeys and ducks and everything much smaller, really. And it made me feel pretty confident that, like I said, you never know how you're going to react till you get to a point. But when push came to shove, I was like, you know what? Once an animal is dead, that is just work at that point. It's just, how do we get this meat out? How do we take care of the meat? How do we make sure nothing goes to waste? To me, coming from the background of really caring about how the animals get to live, part of that translates till, after they're, hopefully they have as good a death as possible. And then after that, you show you're caring for them by respecting everything that they offer. So, whether that be the organs, the hide, the skull, all of that stuff, making sure that you use it to the best of your abilities is really important to me.
So at that point, I mean, are you a full-on omnivore at the end of your
Sorry, my
experience?
my
I said, at that point when you traveled to all these farms, did you become a full-on omnivore at that point?
Yeah, for sure. And, at that point, seeing how the animals, and I did not have any bad experiences with the farmers that I was going to travel to see. And I did vet them pretty well before I went out. But everybody there, it was just really nice. They cared about the animals and the land that they were on so much. Those animals they had a good life, borderline spoiled as
Right.
far as livestock go. Um, and there, and then being part of the slaughtering and butchering of those animals, there was nothing that I was uncomfortable with, it turned out. And of course, after, nothing makes you appreciate meat as much as actually being part of raising it and killing it and taking care of the product. So yeah, I did, over the course of those months, go from somebody who was like vegetarian and curious to somebody who was like, do you need help slaughtering a goat? I'm here.
So at that point, then, I mean, were you like, oh man, what is a goat sausage? Or I mean, were you just starting to get curious and interested in all these things that you could do with all this, newfound meat that you've come across, and just wanted to make all these delectable dishes that you've never got to make as an adult? Or how did that kind of transpire?
Well, I really loved exploring eating meat and having, not had it for so much of my life. And then, even when I was a kid and was eating meat, it was like grocery store, ground beef or whatever.
Right.
So it was a really interesting and new experience to have not only different cuts of meat, but with really good quality meat. And also meat that kind of ran, the gamut of quality and flavor because different breeds of sheep taste different from each other. And, things taste a little bit different depending on what time of year you slaughter them and what they've been raised on. You start to realize, you're talking about like cloning meat.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, technically nobody's getting hurt in the making of this meat, but like you might as well just like call it, cloned protein and no flavor. Like
Right.
you don't understand until you experience real good meat that it's like wine. It has like a terroir. It has the flavor is impacted by everything that animal experiences. And if that animal doesn't if it's not an animal, it's not experiencing anything. Like I can't even imagine what tastes like sadness. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting to not only get to enjoy meat, period, but to get an appreciation of how different and interesting it can be. I think people think, well, beef's beef. Like, no, it's not.
No. Yeah. I definitely agree with that one. And I mean, at our household, we barely buy any beef or pretty much any meat really from a store. We raise our own birds here at the homestead, and then I have a friend that raises cattle, so we always get our beef from him. And then this year, we only normally do a half, but as our kids are getting older, it's like, oh my gosh, we go through an entire half, a side of beef before like the next one's even ready. So now my wife's like, wow, this year, instead of being Mr. I only want to shoot like a 140-inch deer, I think you should fill the freezer a little more before you go down that road. So this year is going to be interesting. I'm going to try and do more deer than I normally do.
Yeah.
But so how did you get into hunting then, now that we're talking about it? I mean, obviously it's kind of a natural progression. The curiosity is getting you, and now you're doing all these different animals, and you're like, okay, I mean, I can see where the progression would go, but how do you just say, okay, now I want to go after wild game?
Yeah, it was a long process to get there for sure. And I think uh, farming and raising animals was a really good source of a lot of different kinds of meat. I was able to raise a fair amount of different critters, but ultimately, where I ended up, we were only able to have birds. So we had chickens and ducks and stuff. And one cannot live on poultry alone. And I, I had always been really interested in hunting, and it just seems like such a talk about an ethical way to get meat. Like there's an argument it's more even more ethical than farming because technically they're not living purely wild lives. They have a pretty cush lifestyle. There's no famine, there's no disease, there's no
Right.
predators here. But push comes to shove, I don't know if our geese would choose to have this cushy luxury life versus just go out and be a wild goose. Um, so I knew that it was something I wanted to explore. And it is one thing to decide you want to explore hunting, and a very different thing to actually go out and do it with having like zero experience. I didn't know anybody who was hunting. Um, and it was just like one of it's an intimidating thing to start to get involved in, especially like I was in my 30s when I started doing this, and it's not like you want to be the 30 something year old at the hunters out of class with all the like
12-year-olds.
like I teach hunters ed now, and I would not want to be in that class. Like it's a great class. I still learn something every time I do it, but you don't want to be the only grown adult in the room. So um yeah, I remember buying a hunting license one time, and even that was just kind of like a struggle to figure out like what kind of hunting license do I need? Where do I get it? Like so there was much Googling, and I finally got it, and I was like, okay, I have a hunting license. What do I do now? And I basically just donated my money to Oregon Fish and Wildlife and never did anything with it. And then the next year, I realized you needed to buy a deer tag, and then there were all of the things that go into like the general season versus the controlled hunts and all of that. And so I was like, okay, general season, deer tag, got it. I even went scouting that year. Like I like found a place that was in the season area, and I went out and I camped for 3 nights. I found deer poop and everything. And then I just was like, I just couldn't go out in the woods with a gun and like do it. I just had no idea what I was doing. And it was honestly, in retrospect, wise of me to not just barrel ahead with having no clue. Um, but I remember, I already had a rifle at this point, and I remember just trying to find a place to sight it in, and there was like nowhere, and wasn't comfortable going out into the wilderness by myself and setting up a target and doing it myself, and I had never sighted in anything before. And I realized, well, that's like a huge stumbling block, like none of the local ranges were open to the public. And then if they were, they weren't going to let you shoot a 30-06 there. So yeah, it was quite interesting journey.
So I kind of want to backtrack on that a little bit then. And just kind of, how did you get to the point to where you bought a gun? Was that when you decided you wanted to start hunting, or was it something that you acquired through, raising the animals and dispatching them in order to process them?
The gun was actually in my family. So it was basically me insisting that it be given to me.
Okay. Okay.
I will put it to more use than it will be sitting in my family's gun safe.
Okay. Okay. That makes a little more sense. And then my next question was, a lot of times there's people that are vegan and have a mindset, and then when they hear a gun, they think of either hunters or killing or whatever. And so they're kind of anti-gun too. I mean, was that something that was kind of your beliefs before all this changed? Did you decided you wanted that gun to pursue these animals?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up feeling comfortable with guns or using them, but I didn't grow up really hating them either. I was kind of, one of those people who was like, guns exist and I don't have anything to do with them, but that's fine. Like I knew we had them in my family, and my mom is, she she's wonderful. She's ex-military, and she always had guns. I don't think I ever actually saw her shoot, and I don't think she would. Honestly, now I think she's probably a little intimidated because it's just been so long. But yeah, we didn't talk about it a lot. And I do remember living in San Francisco, and at some point there was like a series of break-ins in our area, and I lived on like the bottom, ground floor, and it was like an area that was, not the safest. And at some point, I was like, well, maybe I could, have my mom give me one of her guns, and we could have it in the house for self-defense. And like the look on my roommate's face at that moment, like was just like I've been like, well, maybe we should just invite Satan in and he could protect us. Like I might as well have just said that. It did not go over well. And they were like, you were never supposed to bring a gun into this house. And how could you even say that? And I was like, oh wow, okay. So like I get it. People have really strong opinions. I would say, I like, just kind of like anything, the more you learn about something, the more your perspective changes on them. And honestly, the more I've handled guns and shot them, and I've shot at this point more than just hunting guns. I feel more comfortable with them, and I probably more in favor of the Second Amendment than I had been before I started hunting. And I know that even between hunters, those opinions really differ. And I think everybody kind of comes at it from their own perspective. But for me, yeah, like I'm very comfortable with them.
Yeah. So I always just find it interesting because I've grown up around guns. They've always just been around. They've been a part of my life. Since as early as I can remember, my dad would, show me gun safety and say, here, can you pull this slide back and do all these things on a handgun. And what I didn't know is he was actually testing to see how safe or unsafe certain things would probably be around the house if I could actually rack a slide back on something. Then he knew that, just little tips that I've learned along the way. But that I think he was probably testing me to see, how secure things really were or whatever. But it's just kind of a perspective that I'm always interested in, an outside perspective as far as that goes. And it kind of sounds like they were kind of part of your life a little more than like some of your friends, obviously, that had a completely drastically different opinion. And I'm always just kind of curious and wonder about that. And then, like you said, though, with the whole hunting thing, I totally agree. There's a derogatory term, not really derogatory, but a term that they call them, and they call them the FUDs in the hunting world. That, well, that doesn't affect me. I don't know, and well, sometimes when legislation comes about and it says semi-automatic handguns, like we just saw that just happened in Canada, well, that does affect you. That affects everyone. And I'll tell you what, a lot of guys probably wouldn't want to go backwards and just use their pump shotgun to hunt waterfowl anymore. So people don't even realize, and it just makes me so curious. So that's why I had to ask. But
Yeah, I think it is not something that we talk about a lot, but I think having some knowledge of self-defensive shooting and handguns really does go hand in hand with hunting because, I'm a woman, I often hunt alone. I am going into places in the middle of absolute nowhere. And if I run into, I'm not going to carry a sidearm because I'm worried about like a mountain lion or a bear attacking me.
mhm.
But I like to know that if there's, somebody else who decides they want to pull up and camp right next to me in the middle of absolute nowhere, that I'm going to feel safe. And I don't, when I'm out in the woods, I don't really consider my rifle to be self-defense ready. Oftentimes I'm walking with it um, unloaded and kind of on a sling. And I just like to know that if I'm going to be out hunting by myself, I want to feel safe. And that's one of those situations where you are your only and best protection.
Absolutely. I mean, like I remember just reflecting on like my first elk hunt. I carried around the rifle and I had a sidearm and bear spray. And by day 2, I was like, man, that's too heavy. Let's get rid of some of this weight. So I ditched the pistol. And then like day 3, I even ditched the bear spray. I'm like, heck with it. I mean, all I got to worry about is black bears anyway, And then my cousin was like, well, what about mountain lions? I was like, I have a rifle. He goes, you're not even carrying around in it. But I was like, I'll take my chances. I'm not worried about it. But it just kind of comes back to what you said, that I interviewed a girl that was talking about that. And she goes, yeah, I always carry a sidearm, especially if I'm archery hunting, and I do a lot of solo stuff. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, that, the extra weight, I'm thinking in my head, and then she goes, well, it's not so much for animals as I'm a female and I'm by myself. And I'm like, my gosh, I never, you know what I mean? It was one of those things that I never even stopped to think about that or put myself in that perspective to think, wow, there's that type of element that could be out there that, you need that. And it's a terrible thing that someone even has to think that or do that. But I mean, I would rather see somebody to be able to defend themselves like that. It's just crazy, but it's a good thing. And it's a good thing that people become proficient with them.
Absolutely. And I think especially, women are becoming hunters at pretty high rates now, and we're, becoming a fast growing segment of the hunting world. And I think it's really important that people get to go out onto public lands in the backcountry and feel safe, because if you don't feel personally safe, you're not going to go out and hunt. If you feel like you have to have, a buddy there with you all the time, it just makes things much harder. And so I think, if there's any part of you that feels like you're not going to be completely confident going into the woods by yourself, bears, people, mountain lions, whatever, get a sidearm, get some training with that sidearm. Don't think it's just going to protect you because it's there. And yeah, I definitely encourage, especially women, because I mean, I'm not saying that as like a victim mentality. It's just the fact that there are people who may try to take advantage of people in certain situations, and that's a real bummer. But arming yourself is a great way to prevent that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm kind of curious. So you decided to go hunting and you went and you bought your tag, you scouted. How did it go? What'd you do from there?
I did nothing after I scouted. Nervous. Um, it really, so while I'm trying to figure out how to be a hunter, I'm also, I've been cleaning skulls for people kind of as a hobby. And then it started to kind of grow and it became a little bit of a business. Um, Now it's my full-time job. So I started to meet a lot of hunters who were bringing their deer and elk heads in to have me do Euro mounts, and became kind of friendly with some of them. And at some point, I was talking to one of my customers about wanting to go out and harvest deer and how hard it was and all this stuff. And he ended up offering to take me out and helping me get permission to hunt some private land that he knew really well. And it ended up being the thing that made me feel comfortable enough to go out and join him and harvest my first deer. So that was really, really fortunate on my part. And I don't know how much longer it would have taken me to harvest the deer for the first time if I didn't get that lucky.
It might have been a lot more YouTube and Googling, I'm guessing, right? I mean, was
Yeah.
that actually like your main resource as far as the information that you found? I mean, because without that mentorship or that actual, personal interaction with somebody, what resources did you go to? What did you use to try and find, your way in the hunting space?
Yeah, well, I read a book. Well, so I'm out in the west side of Oregon. So I read the book called Elk Trophy Blacktail Hunting, I want to say. And I had some really good insights just on, what the animals are doing. And I read a lot about what deer actually do during the day and seasonally. Um, I spent a lot of time, every hike was suddenly like, let's look up for a deer sign too while we're here. And I also did get permission to hunt on one of my wife's coworkers' property, which is a hazelnut farm and a tree farm. And I haven't harvested a deer there, but it gave me some really good opportunities to go somewhere that's gated and quiet and safe and just spend a lot of time figuring out what it's like to feel like I'm hunting. And I full of deer out there, but honestly, just trying to figure out how it is you move, how the speed at which you hunt. Do you like to sit around and stare at, a hillside? Do you want to go in the woods and, try to figure out where they're at and sneak up on them? It was a really good opportunity for me to kind of experiment with different ways to go about it. And I've seen so many deer on that property. I've never harvested a single one, but it always makes me feel really proud of myself when I even like see them, that they exist and they're there. Because sometimes I feel like, I used to like walk around in the woods at night and be like super scared that like something was going to eat me, like a mountain lion was just going to like jump on me, or like a bear was going to come at me, or God knows what. And I've realized that like there are not as many animals out there as I thought there were.
Right. So
There's nothing like trying to find those animals to realize how unlikely you're going to run in with them is going to be.
But so the blacktail, I mean, that's kind of a pretty elusive deer anyway. So if you're there and you're seeing them, that's a good start.
Yeah, I've managed to harvest two blacktail now, and I feel like maybe that gives me some hope since they are a little bit harder to find than some other things. I'm going to be going on my first mule deer hunt in a couple weeks here, so I'm crossing my fingers it won't be as challenging. Although, half the challenge is just being in the weather with the deer. Like it's almost always wet whenever I'm hunting. It's like gonna be raining the entire time. It's just like the rule of I go hunting, it rains.
The getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's
Mm.
the hard part. But once you get to that point, I think everything else just kind of falls in place if you can immerse yourself in that moment. I find the hardest thing for me is on a day hunt, because I do a lot living in the Midwest. That's mostly day hunts, and you've got your daily life, scenarios and situation. Everything's fast paced, And then you get out there to the woods and you're on their time and you're trying to move and make movements and it's all in their time. And it's hard to just mentally say, okay, stop, slow down. I think that's the hardest thing for me. And then I'll even go mushroom hunting or something. And it's like, what am I doing? What am I running for? What am I, oh, look, there's another black oak. There's another black oak. And just trying to run to that tree. Slow down, look around. And I keep trying to, I have to physically, remind myself to do that. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't probably do.
Yeah, I definitely realized, and I mean, like I said, I've only been hunting a couple of years now, and I feel like at this point I started so late that I will never be really, really good at it. But I like that every time I go out, I feel like I'm a little bit better. Like I learned something last time that makes me like a little bit more comfortable or a little bit better at it than the last time I was out. And I mean, like this year, I'm going hunting in a totally different location, different species, different, terrain. So I'm going to be really thrown off my game, I'm sure. Um, but yeah, it's amazing. I think so many people who hunt grow up in it, and I'm so jealous of people who get to spend their whole life immersed in this lifestyle because there's so much to overcome when you come into it late in life. Like you said, it's the mentality, it's, slowing your brain down, learning to pay attention to the little things, see, tiny movements that you normally don't, get off your phone, just enjoy peace
Yes.
and quiet. It's not something that I'm used to. Like my normal day is busy and full of technology and moving around and trying to, work as quickly as possible. And then, going out into the woods, your whole brain has to kind of reset and figure out how to function again as a human.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm kind of curious. You, you when you harvested the first two or three deer, was that all rifle? Or I see a trad bow behind you, so I'm kind of curious. When did you make that switch?
um, I haven't made the switch officially yet. I'm still working on it. But I've harvested my only two deer with rifle, and I am working on getting comfortable with a longbow so that I can hopefully harvest an animal with that. I am not there. I feel like I took a 2-day seminar on form, and I feel like that really really helped me get comfortable shooting it. But I think there's, comfortable shooting a hay bale in your backyard, and then there's comfortable shooting an animal walking around. And I think I'm a little ways from getting there.
I hunted for a little bit with a longbow. I think it was like 2, maybe 3 years. And I didn't kill very many animals during that time because I was kind of scared. I questioned my ability. And then I harvested one and I wounded another one. And then that's when I kind of I put it down. And I haven't really picked it back up yet, but I always, something about it fascinates me, just the simplicity of it. That's why I originally picked it up, is because I had a compound bow and so many things broke in one season. Sight pins, the wrap with the fiber optics started fraying off and came uncoiled, and I went through 3 drop away arrow rests in one season, and I was like, I'm done. And my buddy was making fun of me because he switched like 2 years before to the longbow, and he's like, well, I don't have any of those problems, just kind of jabbing at me. Well, I don't know. Mine's just fine. My bow works. Yeah, in fact, I don't think my sight's ever broke. Just giving me all this crap, and I was like, you know what? Okay, fine. All right, what should I get? And kind of just dove into it head first and shot an entire, I don't know if it's 5 months with it or whatever it was, and jumped into it. And I still miss it. Like there's just the feeling, there's nothing better than taking a wood arrow that you cut your own fletching and glued them to the shaft and just did it all. You went all the way with it. It's not like, a piece of carbon fiber that was rolled in a factory somewhere. It's different. It's got a different feel to it, and it's really cool. So I hope one day you're comfortable enough to shoot it, and I want to see some pictures of something that you got. That'll be
Yeah, me
cool.
I somewhat say it jokingly, but I'm also kind of serious. I will not be hunting animals with the trad bow until I'm hunting squirrels because I want to have a hard target. Because if I can shoot a squirrel with the trad bow, I can shoot a deer. And also, I'm a little bit less emotionally invested in squirrels. So it's a little bit less of like a, emotional, like, oh my God, if I miss this shot, it's going to be such a big deal. That's going to be hanging over my head. And then if I don't have a good shot on a squirrel, that squirrel is going to be fine. Like, it's going to go right over him. The odds of me actually like hitting it and like injuring it to the point of, I can't, it's just wounded and running off somewhere, kind of unlikely, I think. So yeah, that's my theory anyway, that if I can be like a really successful squirrel hunter, then I will then start to hunt game with the trad bow.
I have taken some squirrels with my trad bow, so I can tell you that it's fun. And you could actually, I don't know what kind of points you're going to use, but they make like these big round blunt points that look like a mushroom tip. And those work really well for squirrels too. So you could look into that, and then you don't have to worry about your arrow staying in the tree.
I didn't even think about that. That's
So
a
it's
good
a little
point.
tip for you. If you don't use a
Right.
broadhead or a field point because it'll stick in the tree. If you got a big mushroom tip on the end of it, it'll just hit the tree and bounce back.
Oh, good to know.
So, yeah, I mean, that's awesome how you progressed into that journey. And I'm glad to see that you did it and kind of excited to see. And I've noticed you say you're at a disadvantage, but I've noticed with a lot of adult, we'll call them the adult onset hunter. To me, it's like
Oh,
a little dirty word because it sounds like you're diagnosing a disease or something with it, you know. But I've noticed there's so many adult onset hunters that just they do really really well, and I think part of it is they've got those life skills that they can kind of do more research than a younger person would and totally look up to a mentor, and they have the drive because they've gone through their whole life without hunting. They have to make a fully conscious decision and say, I want to do this. And when they make that commitment, they're going to go full force into it and fully commit to it. And that's when you see a lot of progress in a short amount of time. So it's pretty cool. I'm glad to see, and I'm glad you shared your story because it's pretty interesting, and hopefully it inspires other people that maybe they can open up their mind to different things if they just kind of give it a chance.
Yeah, I hope so because I feel like, if I can be a hunter starting in my mid 30s and having come from the background of being a vegan animal rights activist, like if that's not an argument for anybody can become a hunter at any time, I don't know what is.
Absolutely. That's pretty cool. So before we go, I kind of want to just ask you real quick, what are kind of your plans in the future for hunts? I know you were talking, like when we were talking a couple weeks ago, you were trying possibly to go on a bear hunt. How did any future or more plans on that, or how's that going?
Yeah, if there's one thing that 2020 has taught me this year is that I shouldn't even bother making plans to do anything because man, it's been, it's been a wild ride. I was planning to go scouting for my mule deer trip out in Eastern Oregon and simultaneously be trying to find a bear to take home. But I ended up canceling the trip because we had such bad smoke, or half our state was on fire
Mm-hmm.
very recently, and we had really bad smoke. Still had some fire activity in the area, so I was like, it just doesn't feel like the right time to be on the other side of the state. So I'm just going to hang out till we get some rain. We've got rain happening literally right now, so I'm very happy.
Perfect.
But yeah, so this year I'm doing my first mule deer hunt. I'm going to hopefully get out goose hunting with some friends this year. I've been really excited to try that. And we raise geese, but this year they just decided they weren't going to give us any babies for some reason. Not a single egg hatched. So hoping to get some geese in the freezer. And then my big goal right now, either later this fall or in the spring, is to try to seriously bear hunt because I've had bear meat. I love bear skulls and I do bear rugs with my work, and it's just something that I've been really wanting to do. So fingers crossed, I will find a bear.
So actually, now that you bring that up, I kind of want to talk about that because you've got quite an interesting business. Not only do you do like the taxidermy side of, European mounts and tanning hides and getting them ready for clients, but you also do something that I haven't ever really heard of until I heard it on the radio. And I was like, it makes sense, but I've never heard of that with the whole pet thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I just, so my business is called Dermestarium. Shameless plug for the thing that nobody can say or spell.
Is it dermastidarium or dermastarium?
Dermestidarium. If people want to find it, they can go to beetlebonecleaning.com and that'll take them to me because I realized nobody could find my website.
So you recently changed it.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I didn't change it, but it'll just get you to the correct place.
Okay.
Don't ask me to name a business for you. But yeah, I started doing it just for European mounts and kind of the hunting taxidermy side of things. And then, people would ask me if it was okay if they could bring their cat in or their dog and to get the skull or skeleton cleaned. And I was like, sure, why not? I can help people out. And one thing that will put this in a little better context is, so Dermestidarium, my bone cleaning business used to be my quote side hustle while I was working full time doing pet aftercare. So I used to work in a flame-based crematory. I've done water-based cremation. I've done kind of end-of-life counseling for people who are going through the process of wondering if it was the right time to euthanize their pet. So it was kind of just in my wheelhouse. And I was like, well, marrying those two things together just sounds like the right thing to do if people want it. And I didn't know anybody wanted that. And then, I started doing a cat skull here and there. It turns out it's actually a really popular thing that people want to have done. And just this past month, I launched a different division of my business specifically just for pets. So it's called Restwell Pet Memorials. And that is a place if people want their, pet skull or skeleton or their hide tanned or, some paw prints made, whatever they want, you can pretty much do it all.
That's pretty interesting. In my head, I just picture people having when you go to a museum and you see a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something where it's the skeleton that they've got a little display or something of their cat or something, But
I have not had anything bring anything that big in yet.
But so that's really cool. And okay, so before we go, I just kind of wanted to ask you, could you tell people where they can find you, Carla?
Yeah, so my business, Dermestidarium, can be found, if you can spell it, at dermestidarium.com or beetlebonecleaning.com. And you can find me on Instagram at carla.brauer, Brauer. Don't know why people want to follow me on Instagram, but you can if you want to.
Awesome. I appreciate you coming on, Carla, and I appreciate you talking to me and sharing your story. I think it's important, like I said earlier, that we share this kind of story so we can maybe change people's perspective and let people open their mind a little bit and see things from a different angle.
Well, I really appreciate having the opportunity to share my story and being on here.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.